Hello and welcome to the World Today. Authorities in Hawaii released the first names of people killed by wildfires, even as the death toll stands at 106. For the first time, North Korea speaks of detaining U.S. soldier Travis King. Pyongyang says he crossed into the state because of racial discrimination in the army. Plus, merchant ships leaves Odessa despite fears of Russia's Black Sea attack. Now, the names among the first victims of people killed by devastating wildfires that swept through Maui have been released by officials, shedding light on the human toll of the disaster that has left the island in mourning. 1 week after the catastrophic blaze, at least 106 people died on the Hawaiian island. Among the victims were two individuals whose identities have been confirmed: Robert Dickman, aged 74, and Buddy Jontok, aged 79. The full scope of the tragedy is still unfolding as 3 more victims have been identified, but their names have been withheld until their families can be properly notified. The catastrophic fire, which destroyed the historic town of Lahaina within hours, has been followed by a slow and grueling search for victims, leaving the close-knit communities of Maui grappling with the enormity of the loss. Governor Josh Green provided a somber update on the ongoing search efforts, revealing that as of Tuesday evening, only 20% of the disaster site had been thoroughly searched. He cautioned that the death toll could climb significantly and even double over the next 10 days, underscoring the unprecedented scale of the tragedy that has been befallen Maui. Wake of the devastating wildfires that have brought destruction to Maui, U.S. President Joe Biden has extended his heartfelt regrets and condolences to the victims and their families. Hawaii Governor Josh Green conveyed President Biden's sentiments during a news brief held today. Governor Green emphasized that while the president's condolences are appreciated, he is also keen on ensuring that the ongoing work in the disaster zone remains unimpeded. The wildfires, which blazed through the island with an unprecedented intensity, have left a trail of devastation in their wake. According to officials, over 2,200 buildings have been destroyed or damaged by the flames, with a staggering 86% of these structures being residential. The financial toll is equally distressing, with an estimated $5.5 billion in damage caused by the disaster, leaving both individuals and communities grappling with the aftermath.
I spoke with the president this morning. We speak often. He and Joe Biden extend their absolute love and heartfelt regrets about the tragedy that's occurred. They're heartsick that we've lost these 101 souls. They will come to be with us. If President Biden could just teleport himself over, he would have come here in 5 seconds. I've never seen such dedication in a president who within 6 hours dedicated his time to determine that this was an emergency and to commit full repair, full reconstruction for our people here in Hawaii. So President Biden and I will work out a time for him to come when the tough work is done, when the heartbreaking work is done on the ground, finding those we've lost. He was so sensitive about that. He did not want to interfere with the incredibly difficult emotional and physical work that goes on in a disaster zone. We have a large force of people here on the ground. We now have 416 people from FEMA, 273 specifically from the National Guard as well, 185 in the emergency response with 20 dogs, finding those who have suffered. 101 lives have now been lost. 27% of the survey has been completed.
President Joe Biden has announced his intention to travel to Hawaii in the near future to assess the ongoing recovery efforts in the aftermath of the devastating wildfires that have wreaked havoc on Maui. The president's desire to support the affected communities is evident But the White House remains cautious about the potential impact of his visit on the ongoing search and recovery operations. While addressing an economic event in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, President Biden made his intention to visit Hawaii clear. He emphasized his eagerness to witness firsthand the challenges faced by the communities devastated by the wildfires. However, the president refrained from specifying whether he would visit Maui itself. This subtlety is a nod to the White House's concerns that his presence could inadvertently interfere with the critical work being carried out to retrieve more bodies from the ruins of destroyed buildings. White House officials are engaged in deliberations regarding the logistics and implications of a presidential visit to the disaster-stricken area. The administration is keen on avoiding any disruptions to the ongoing search and rescue operations, recognizing the urgency of the situation.
Let me address the devastating wildfires, some of which are still burning in Hawaii. They've claimed the lives of 99 people so far, and they haven't cleaned things up yet. The deadliest wildfire in more than 100 years. A whole city destroyed. Generations of native Hawaiian history turned into ruin. I've spoken to Governor Josh Green multiple times and reassured him the state will have everything it needs from the federal government. I immediately approved the governor's request for expedited major disaster declaration. That's a fancy word of saying whatever you need, you're going to get. And that'll get aid into the hands of people who desperately need it, who have lost their loved ones, who have lost their homes, their livelihoods, who've been damaged and destroyed. And think about this. All that area they got to plow up, they can't do it now because they don't know how many bodies are there. They don't know what's left. Imagine being a mom or dad, wondering where your child is. Imagine being a husband or wife, a mother or father. It's really tough stuff.
The aftermath of a catastrophic fire that swept through parts of Maui has left survivors in Lahaina grappling with loss and destruction. Families are coming together in the face of adversity, relying on each other for support as they begin the difficult process of rebuilding their lives. Local resident Sarah Rodriguez tearfully recounted the terrifying moments when she and her family were forced to evacuate their home. "We had minutes to grab whatever we could," she said. "The flames were so close and it felt like a nightmare. Our house, our memories, everything is gone." In the wake of the devastation, the tight-knit community of Lahaina is demonstrating its resilience by rallying together to support one another. Makeshift relief centers have been set up to provide food, shelter, and clothing for those who lost everything.
Yadira Ulua was pumping gas near the apartment building where she lived on the western side of Maui when the winds kicked up, blowing shingles off the roof and propelling the wildfire that would soon incinerate her town of Lahaina. The winds from a distant hurricane was so fierce they shook her car, and as the fire approached, Yulua began to pray. Her teen daughter, she realized, was alone in the apartment.
God guided me. I went straight to the apartment, and there was my daughter. I was able to grab her and let's go, I told her. We ran away. I started crying going down the stairs, seeing the flames. Since the fire didn't stop, it kept running.
They climbed into Yulua's blue truck and fled. The gas station, she later learned, exploded when the wildfire reached it, and the apartment building burned to the ground. Yulua, who works as a housekeeper, and her daughter found refuge with an older daughter in the village of Oloalu. But the 55-year-old has barely been able to eat or sleep in the days since. Like many here, she wishes there had been emergency alert warning to spur people into leaving sooner. 56-year-old taxi driver Kiet Ma was at home as the fire bore down, just 50 feet away from his house. His wife Daisy Liu, also a taxi driver, was out on the road somewhere in the swirling black smoke. He couldn't reach her because phone and electrical services were down.
very hard to see this. It's like all my life put in, it's all gone in a minute. And it's hard to me, I feel, until we have enough time to build it all up again. Because so many years we put all hard working that we have in that house, everything. We have no chance to take anything out. There's no warning, no nothing, and we on the road working, you know. But thank God I have my husband and I still survive, you know.
On Thursday, Maha and Lou went back to check on their home. It was gone. 20 years of work, driving private taxis on the island, putting everything into their house, and there was nothing left.
Likewise, a Kula resident who operates a local inn on Maui Island in Hawaii is grappling with the profound shock and sorrow stemming from the traumatic ordeal of the wildfires. These fires, the most lethal to hit the United States in more than 100 years, have inflicted severe damage upon his hometown and the cherished Lahaina to the west, a historic location. Amidst the wildfires that have swept through Maui, a significant portion of global attention has been directed towards Lahaina, the town that endured the full force of an inferno unparalleled in over a century of U.S. history. However, the catastrophic blaze that engulfed the historic town was just one of several destructive fires that have caused havoc across the Maui landscape. In the upcountry town of Kula, located just 40 kilometers east of Lahaina, the blaze has also ravaged approximately 280 hectares of land and destroyed about 20 homes since last Tuesday, leaving residents grappling with loss. According to James Worth's recollections, the town of Kula has held a special place in his memory. For over 30 years, he managed a family in there, drawing visitors to its charming and traditional allure. However, this idyllic image was shattered when a wildfire began its merciless advance, leaving destruction in its path and transforming the once picturesque area into a scene of devastation.
I think about the winds that like they were, it just blew over to our side, and then just from there was really no stopping it. All day long we were fighting it. Had our garden hoses out, buckets of water. I was trying to save our cottages, so I just put sprinklers on the cottages, on the roofs. I think about the town of Lahaina, and you know, it hurts. I don't even like thinking about it because it hurts so bad.
Our correspondent Maria Bird joins us now for more. Maria, can you provide us an overview of the extent of the damage caused by the wildfires in Lahaina?
The extent of the damage, I think, is still even being measured at this time. What we've seen at this time is that you're talking about a very large percentage of the island that has been totally and completely destroyed. There's only about 32%. I know the governor had mentioned 72% numbers previously, but 32% of the damages have actually been gone through by the emergency teams and obviously those cadaver dogs. And so we're still talking about 70 or more % of the wildfires damage that has still not yet been, they've gone through at this time. So we have a long way to go to see exactly the extent of all that's happened. We know it's billions of dollars that's going to take to recover it, but beyond the monetary pieces, it's really about the time and the capacity to rebuild and how individuals who are living in these communities, because as I heard you all state earlier, most of the devastation has been to residential areas, which means these are people that are without homes. So we have to look to see how that's going to be addressed. If there's other parts of the island, and whether it's not another Hawaiian island that will have to serve to be able to rebuild some of the communities. So there's a long way to go as we talk about the real full extent of the impact of these wildfires.
And Maria, before I go into the microcosmic effect of the wildfires, how have local authorities and emergency responders managed the firefighting efforts and contained the fires if they have?
So the fires have been at this time pretty much contained. Obviously, they're still being very careful as it relates to if there are other residuals that could be happening or if they've missed something. We all know that when you talk about the amount of debris that is in the aftermath of these fires, oftentimes it does create a reigniting that could potentially occur. And so that is really where they're looking at this time, is to see if there is any potential reigniting that could occur as a result of these wildfires, and making sure they have been able to cover all of the areas in the communities that potentially were affected by these wildfires. So at this time, it looks like the emergency teams of firefighters and those emergency individuals have been able to contain as much as possible of what is known as a wildfire that occurred last week.
And what are we hearing with regards to the morbid process of identifying the bodies found, which I would imagine is quite complicated because of the severity of the victims' burns?
Yes, so there have been only a very few. One name has been released. Many of the bodies are unidentifiable, so some families may not ever know exactly. Obviously, they will probably be able to identify that that person has passed as a result of the fire, but might not be identified the actual body. So there's two others that they're claiming that they have been able to identify, but they have not yet released the names, so they have to notify the family first. But we're talking about over 100 people, 106 people, and we're only talking about 3 that have been identified at this time. So there's a long way to go, and it's expected that the rate of mortality is going to rapidly increase as they're able to go through the rubble and debris that is still only 30% has been completed at this time.
Well, for the survivors, how are they getting back on their feet? Have you been able to speak to anyone or hear about people's personal experiences related to this?
Those who I have talked to on the ground and other individuals that are actually there, whether they're serving as emergency relief or they're serving just covering the stories, at this time, I think what I'm hearing, the feedback is that those residents on the ground are just absolutely in shock. They cannot believe what has happened. I watched some of the clips that you all had regarding individuals that just lost everything that they worked hard for. And that is really what we're hearing, is that the individuals cannot believe that almost their entire lives have been taken away. Yes, we know there's insurance companies that can help to rebuild, but the greater challenges is just some of the efforts that have gone into, building not only a physical home, but an emotional home for families. And that has been taken away. Family heirlooms, things that you cannot replace, have been lost because we're talking about not just destruction as a result, as we oftentimes see in the U.S., whether it's hurricanes or tornadoes, where your stuff might be everywhere, but typically you can find some things that are very special to you. But when you're talking about wildfires, those things have all been burned away in so many ways. So it's going to be a long road to emotional recovery for these families as well.
And, there's been quite a bit of criticism on the government officials in Hawaii about how residents were not alerted on time or even at all in some cases. What more can you tell us, and have they put anything in place for preventative future occurrences?
So there is an alarm system that is supposed to go off in case of an emergency such as this. That was not, from all the accounts that have been reported and what we've heard from the local government there, that did not happen. Those individuals who are residents did not hear any type of alarm system that is supposed to go off. Obviously, they're more than likely typically hurricanes that are notified in this way. So that is the beginning point of a lack of notification and communication from the local government. And so the federal government has come in to try to assist to alleviate some of the pressures that the residents are feeling, and some of what they believe has been a lack of communication and a lack of support from their local government.
All right. Well, my last question to you, Maria, is how do you envision the process of rebuilding and restoring the affected areas in the aftermath of the wildfires? I would imagine it would be heavily community-based, this process of rebuilding.
Yes, this process of rebuilding is going to be heavily dependent upon the community. We've seen that the communities have banded together. We know emergency response teams are there, but even community members who do still have homes are making foods for those who are homeless, are reaching out, providing resources that they have. So we're going to see the community and those who are residents of Maui banding together, probably like they never have before, to support one another. That'll be the first step. But obviously, there will be a great requirement on top of the federal government to provide resources for the rebuilding process, which might have to be a mixture between rebuilding on the island of Maui and potentially other Hawaiian islands, or allowing people to relocate to areas within the main constituency of the United States.
All right, Maria Bird, really appreciate you on this. In neighboring Canada, wildfires have surged through the Northwest Territories of neighboring Canada, compelling residents to flee their homes and leaving one remote community devastated. The fires also pose a looming threat to the territorial capital, Yellowknife. In response to the escalating situation, emergency vehicles have been urgently dispatched to contain the spreading blazes following the declaration of a state of emergency on Tuesday. The Canadian government has taken steps to address the crisis by granting approval for federal assistance to combat the raging wildfires. Additionally, armed forces have been mobilized to provide support in firefighting efforts within the affected regions. The territorial capital, Yellowknife, acted decisively by declaring a local state of emergency late on Monday, acknowledging the potential risks posed by the nearby wildfires. And the scale of this year's wildfire outbreak has been unprecedented, with flames engulfing portions of nearly all 13 Canadian provinces and territories. The consequences of these wildfires have been far-reaching, leading to the displacement of residents, disruptions in energy production, and necessitating the utilization of both domestic and international firefighting resources. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is facing an extensive indictment in Georgia invoking the Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, for the first time against a former president. However, legal analysts are pointing out the complexities and potential risks that prosecutors could encounter as they pursue the case against Trump and his associates. This historic development, which emerged on Monday, August 14th, saw Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis unveiling a wide-ranging indictment against Trump and 18 of his associates. The indictment outlines a scheme aimed at overturning Trump's electoral loss to Democrat Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. Total of 41 felony counts have been leveled against the defendants, marking an unprecedented legal challenge for the prosecutors. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, who is spearheading the case, has demonstrated her proficiency with the RICO statute previously. She successfully employed this statute to prosecute educators in Georgia who were accused of cheating on standardized tests, underscoring her familiarity with the legal tool. But the magnitude and high-profile nature of the current case undoubtedly presents new dimensions.
A Fulton County grand jury returned a true bill of indictment, charging 19 individuals with violations of Georgia law arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in this state.
And here, the indictment charges that Trump and the other defendants were part of a informal network that was seeking illegally to overturn the results of the 2020 election. And they're using a state statute that is modeled on the federal RICO statute and has many of the same features. And like the federal model, the Georgia statute allows prosecutors to sweep together in a single indictment, and most likely in a single trial, a large number of defendants and a large number of different criminal schemes, all of which are related only in that they're part of the same overall pattern of racketeering through an enterprise. And a pattern of racketeering just means 2 or more violations of particular state crimes, including trying to get a state officer to violate his oath, forgery, conspiracy, and so on.
Primary thing that jumps out to me about this prosecution is that it's a Georgia state prosecution, and so there's nothing that the federal government can do to interfere with it in the way that the federal prosecutions, if Trump became president or another Republican that was favorable to him, could either pardon someone for a federal conviction or just stop the prosecutions wherever they were at the time of the election.
North Korea has confirmed the detention of U.S. soldier Travis King, who reportedly crossed into its territory last month. The North Korean authorities claim that Private King entered their territory due to what they describe as inhuman maltreatment and racial discrimination within the U.S. Army. However, these assertions have yet to be independently verified. The official state news agency KCNA has reported that Private King admitted to crossing the border illegally and expressed a desire for refuge in North Korea. The details of this alleged admission remain limited, and the report did not provide any insights into Private King's current health status or North Korea's intentions regarding his potential status as a refugee. The situation has prompted growing concerns for Private King's well-being, as he has not been in communication or sight since his reported crossing last month. The 23-year-old private made his crossing while participating in a guided tour from South Korea. The incident has escalated into an international issue, with the United States working towards his release in collaboration with the United Nations Command, which oversees the border area. This command maintains a direct communication line with the North Korean Army for such situations. And amid the unfolding developments surrounding the detention of U.S. soldier Travis King in North Korea, his mother has come forward to acknowledge awareness of the reports from the state news agency KCNA. In a statement shared on social media, she addresses the situation and expresses concern about her son's safety, appealing for him to be treated humanely by the authorities in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Travis King's mother acknowledged the report, but she emphasizes the responsibility of DPRK authorities for her son's well-being. She also conveyed her desire for direct communication with her son, requesting a phone call to establish contact. As the situation continues to evolve, U.S. officials have maintained their perspective that Travis King's crossing into North Korea was intentional. However, they have refrained from designating him as a prisoner of war at this stage. A former FBI agent, Charles McGonigal, has admitted to working on behalf of Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska while the latter was under U.S. sanctions. McGonigal, who led the FBI's counterintelligence division in New York until his retirement in 2018, pleaded guilty to one count of conspiracy in a New York court. This plea deal comes in exchange for prosecutors dropping several other charges against him. The prosecution initially detailed the case in January, alleging that McGonigal had received concealed payments from Oleg Deripaska in return for carrying out investigative work against a rival businessman. Additionally, it was claimed that McGonigal had attempted, albeit unsuccessfully, to lift sanctions imposed on Deripaska in 2019. These allegations resulted in McGonigal initially pleading not guilty to 4 criminal counts, including sanctions, violations, and money laundering. 55-year-old McGonigal stood before a federal court in Manhattan on Tuesday to admit that he had indeed worked for Deripaska during the period between the spring and autumn of 2021. His role primarily involved seeking negative information about Vladimir Putin, a rival of Deripaska, with the intention of having Putin placed on the U.S. sanctions.
To be removed from SDN list, because I think it was not according to the law. Even their law was not according. And what they brought, as as a first step, when they published the list of hundreds, what was the reason? They literally put on list, whole Russian, private business. Russian private economy shrunk for the last years, to less than 30%, and then they put it all on the list because of what? They all close, all these hundreds, they all close to Putin. They all support, whatever claim it was a malign activity. It's nonsense. It's obvious. It's always nice to talk about, oligarchs, all this, balderdash, but in reality, it's a simple case. They made it wrong with aluminum, and they suffer. It's clear. Europe can, consume, 14 million ton. U.S. consume around, 14 million ton. Almost 30. When aluminum jump, $1,000, almost $30 billion would be wasted in a year, and they, make a step back. For this, plant, for this facilities, they don't have this problem. You really pretend that our president will bend on any circumstances? You're journalists, you know them even better than anyone else. It's impossible. Just it's a mysterious mistake, which was done by U.S. tried to bring Russian people as a part of hostages, for their affairs.
Representatives of the junta in Niger have visited Chad for talks with the interim president, Gen Mahat Idriss Deby. The delegation includes the junta-appointed civilian Prime Minister Ali Ma'man Zein and 2 other members of the ruling military council. Mr. Zein, who has emerged as the diplomatic face of the military government, says his country is now under a transitional government and reiterates that junta's readiness for talks. However, he said the junta would only talk to those he called partners who respect his country's sovereignty. Immediately after the coup in July, Chadian President Deby made efforts to mediate between the Niger junta and the ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. The country also says it would not participate in any military action against the Niger coup leaders as suggested by ECOWAS. Meanwhile, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has spoken with Mali's military leader, Assimi Goïta, in a phone call about the recent coup in Niger. This was confirmed in a social media post by Mali's military leader, where Mr. Putin stressed the importance of a peaceful resolution of the situation for a more stable Sahel. The call adds to growing fears from the West over Russia's influence in Western Africa. The Russian president has called for a return to constitutional order in Niger, while Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin welcomed the coup. Niger holds strategic importance for major global players, including the United States, China, Europe, and Russia. It has emerged as a focal point for foreign forces engaged in countering a regional Islamist insurgency. Additionally, the nation boasts abundant uranium and oil resources. UN Global Education Envoy Gordon Brown is calling on the International Criminal Court to recognize the gender discrimination in Afghanistan as a crime against humanity and investigate it with the aim of prosecuting those responsible. Mr. Brown says he has written to ICC prosecutor Karim Khan to argue his point on the 2nd anniversary of the Taliban's return to power as U.S.-led forces withdrew after 20 years of war. He calls the Taliban acts the worst example of human rights abuse against girls and women around the world.
It is exactly 2 years since the return of the Taliban to power, and it's 2 years since the start of a new repression. I'm here to salute and pay tribute to the determination, the courage, and the resilience of Afghan girls and Afghan women, who, even as millions of them are suffering poverty and hunger, have been fighting the most egregious, vicious, and indefensible violation of women's rights and girls' rights in the world today. The legal opinion we have received shows that the denial of education to Afghan girls and employment to Afghan women is gender discrimination, which should count as a crime against humanity, and it should be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. And so today, the international community must step up its efforts to restore the freedom of girls to go to school, women to university, to work, to walk in public places, and to enjoy basic liberties, and end what many have called gender apartheid against girls and women.
Amidst Australia's preparations for a groundbreaking referendum to constitutionally acknowledge the nation's Indigenous population, an independent Aboriginal senator, Lydia Thorpe, has voiced a call to halt the process. Thorpe has branded the proposed constitutional change as mere window dressing, asserting that it lacks the potential to effect meaningful change. Australians will be asked to vote in a landmark referendum later this year to determine whether they support altering the Constitution to include a voice to Parliament, an Indigenous committee tasked with advising the Parliament on matters that impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. However, Lydia Thorpe's vocal opposition highlights a broader skepticism regarding the efficacy of this constitutional recognition. Thorpe's stance underscores concerns that the proposed change might not lead to substantial improvements in the lives of Indigenous people.
This is why we should call off the referendum. It has caused nothing but harm and division. And for what? There won't be change until this society changes, until this society's thinking, values, attitudes and systems have been revolutionised in order to ensure real self-determination. It promises to finally fix the Aboriginal problem. It is false hope, because it is tricking people into genuinely believing that a powerless advisory body is going to protect our country and sacred sites, save our lives, keep our babies at home. The voice is the window dressing for constitutional recognition. We have rejected constitutional recognition before, even with a yes vote outcome. Then it's still a denial of what the black sovereign movement is about, and it's hand-on-heart do-gooders who think they know what's best for us. So that's a form of racism as well.
For your time today, please join me in thanking Lydia Thorpe.
Scientists in Russia's Arctic north have introduced a fresh batch of bison to an area where woolly mammoths once roamed in a bid to fight climate change. Experts at the Pleistocene Park in the far north of Russia's Yakutia Sakha Republic region says the large herbivores would give a boost to local habitat and help protect the region's permafrost that locks away greenhouse gases that would otherwise end up being released into the atmosphere due to global warming. Nikita Zimov, an environmental scientist and the director of the Pleistocene Park Restoration Project, has noted that 2 previous herds have effectively adapted and reproduced. He made this statement while examining a group of newly introduced bison. During the late Pleistocene era, spanning from 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago, both bison and mammoths freely inhabited the Russian Arctic.
It's a third expedition to bring bison to the Pleistocene Park. First 2 groups proved to be able to live here in the Arctic on their own and successfully reproduce. And that's why we are looking to bring more. We want to create an ecosystem which will be big enough to influence climate. And of course, for that we need many, many animals. And that's just the first initial steps. Pleistocene Park is experiment, it's a scientific experiment. And we are finding the ways how to restore ecosystems, and we are looking for the most effective ways to mitigate climate change. When animals present, grasses and herbs get competitive advantage against mosses, lichen, shrubs and trees. And these animals slowly allowing grasses and herbs to establish and create high productive pastures, where these animals will be able to live on their own, just the same way as they did back in the Pleistocene, when mammoths roamed on this place. Grasslands are much lighter than shrublands and forests. And the lighter the surface, the more energy it reflects back to space. And here in the grasslands, you can just physically make temperatures lower by keeping the surface much lighter. And that's where animals help. When everything is covered with snow, animals, they do and look for food. And they dig in the snow for the food, for the forage. And they compact the snow. And that this snow loses most of its heat insulating abilities. And this allows to freeze ground cooler and keep permafrost intact underneath. The goal of the places in park is not only to restore a wild nature and make it rich. The goal is also to help us mitigate climate change. The grazing ecosystems in the Arctic have a potential to mitigate climate change, sequester CO2 from the atmosphere, and also preserve permafrost from degradation.
In Sudan, where 4 months of conflict has caused a huge humanitarian disaster and human rights violations. This is according to the spokesperson for the World Health Organization, Margaret Harris. She emphasizes that the conflict's consequences have brought about severe hardships on individuals' lives, health, and overall well-being. Sudan is grappling with persistent occurrences of measles, malaria, and dengue, with nearly a third of Sudanese children under the age of 5 experiencing prolonged malnutrition.
67% of hospitals in the affected areas are out of service. In these past 4 months, since the conflict began, WHO has verified 53 attacks on healthcare, which have killed 11 people, injured 38, and along with other disruptions, these attacks have denied access to care for tens of thousands of people.
Similarly, the United Nations is warning that millions of people are running out of food in Sudan, and some are dying due to lack of health care. In a joint statement, the UN said time is running out for farmers to plant the crops that will feed them and their neighbors. Medical supplies are scarce. The situation is spiraling out of control. Sudan has been witnessing deadly clashes between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, in the capital, Khartoum, and other areas since April 15.
These leaders of global humanitarian organizations warn that the war is destroying people's lives and their homeland and violating their basic human rights. They call on the parties to the conflict to end the fighting, protect civilians, and give humanitarian organizations unfettered access to all people in need in all areas of Sudan. They remind the fighters that attacking civilians, looting humanitarian supplies, targeting aid workers and hospitals, or blocking aid, things we have seen throughout those 4 months, may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Catholic devotees in Bolivia are congregating on the outskirts of La Paz for an annual ritual involving rock breaking, seeking blessings from the Virgin of Urcupina for good fortune. Gathered beside a dried riverbed, worshipers are collecting rocks to be blessed during a ceremony that blends indigenous customs with Catholic traditions. This rite traces its roots to a traditional tale about a destitute shepherd girl who, while tending to her sheep near the city of Cochabamba, experienced a vision of the Virgin Mary. As the legend goes, the vision instructed the shepherd girl to gather rocks and take them home to her poverty-stricken family. Astonishingly, upon their arrival, the rocks transformed into silver, rescuing the family from their impoverished circumstances. In the hopes of receiving a comparable blessing from the Virgin of Urcupina, devotees are sanctifying their rocks with beer and cocoa leaves, preparing for the rock-breaking ritual. As per tradition, the size of the rock broken by the pilgrim correlates with the magnitude of their anticipated economic bless. And that's it for the World Today. I'm Susan Ilian. See you tomorrow.